The sign was hand-painted, crude, but the words were clear enough. Choose any bride, free of charge. The sun over Fort Worth, Texas was a merciless hammer, beating down on the dusty yard. A row of women stood there, heads bowed like wilting flowers. Their eyes were vacant, their futures a closed book. But one of them didn't bow her head. She was Comanche, young, with iron shackles biting into her wrists. Her eyes weren't vacant. They held a fire that no chains could ever hope to put out. The townsfolk stared, their whispers a poison in the thick, hot air. They called her savage, a curse. She stood unbroken, a thunderstorm waiting to break. Then the sheriff cleared his throat, his voice cracking like dry leather. Any cowboy looking for a wife can choose one today, for free. The words were a death sentence and a prize all at once. The crowd of dusty men leaned in, their hunger visible. A cowboy separated himself from the crowd. His boots kicked up little clouds of red dust. His shadow fell long and dark over the line of women. Every eye in that yard was on him. The whole town held its breath. He lifted his hand to choose. The crowd expected him to point to one of the settler girls, the ones with pale skin and powdered faces, dressed in their best faded dresses. They were meant to be prizes, but his hand didn't stop there. It kept moving, slowly, deliberately, until his finger pointed straight at the Comanche girl, the one with bleeding wrists and fire in her eyes. A single, collective gasp shot through the yard. It was sharper than a gunshot. No one saw this coming. No one believed he would dare choose the untamable one, the one they said was bad medicine. Murmurs turned to angry growls. "Why her?" someone spat. "Is he insane?" The sheriff's jaw went tight. His eyes narrowed to slits. He knew this wasn't just a foolish choice. It was a lit match dropped on a bone-dry prairie. The peace between the settlers and the Comanche was a fragile thing, and this cowboy had just taken a hammer to it. But the cowboy didn't move. His boots seemed planted in the very dirt of the earth. His gaze wasn't on the angry faces in the crowd. It was on her. She lifted her chin. Her hands, though chained, balled into fists. Her body was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage she had held inside for months. She was caught between the terror of a new master and the raw, unbending pride that had kept her alive. The chains rattled, a sound that cut through the silence. "You sure about this, boy?" the sheriff barked, his hand drifting toward the gun on his hip. "You know what she is." The cowboy's voice was low, but it carried across the entire yard. Steady, calm. "I know exactly who she is." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And she's the one I choose." The declaration landed like a physical blow. Some faces in the crowd twisted with rage. Others were just stunned into silence. Mothers grabbed their daughters, pulling them back as if the girl's very presence was a disease. A grizzled old rancher spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "No good will come of this," he vowed to anyone who would listen. But the cowboy didn't even flinch. His outstretched hand was an anchor in a sea of judgment. The sheriff was trapped. It was his own stupid rule, his own grand gesture. He couldn't go back on it now, not in front of the whole town. With a frustrated sigh, he nodded to the guard. "Unlock her." The sound of the iron shackles hitting the dirt was hollow, final. It echoed in the girl's ears like a clap of thunder. She rubbed her bruised wrists, her eyes never leaving the cowboy's. She was trying to read him, to understand the angle. Was this mercy? Was it defiance? Or was it something else entirely, something hidden deep behind his calm expression? The whispers around them grew frantic. Some feared a Comanche war party would ride down on them by morning. Others were just excited by the scandal. Inside the girl's chest, a hurricane of emotions was raging. There was fury at being treated like cattle. There was a flicker of gratitude for being freed from the chains. But strongest of all was the deep, cold suspicion of the man who had just claimed her. She took a single step forward. The dust puffed up around her bare feet. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about him. This was the beginning of something. Something that would test them in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. And the West would remember this day. The air grew thick as the last chain fell away. Before she could even process the feeling of lightness in her arms, the crowd erupted. "She's a savage!" one man roared. "He'll be dead by sunrise, and she'll be the one holding the knife," a woman shrieked. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Old men shook their fists. The rancher, who had spat on the ground, yelled that this single act would bring Comanche arrows to every doorstep in Fort Worth. The noise was a physical wave of hatred crashing over her. The sheriff stepped between them, his face a mask of grim warning. "A Comanche bride brings a special kind of trouble, son," he said, his voice low and grave. "The kind you don't walk away from. You better think twice." But the cowboy didn't waver. His eyes were still locked on hers, and in them, she saw a conviction so strong that the fury of an entire town couldn't seem to touch it. She rubbed her wrists again, trying to chase away the phantom feeling of the cold iron. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Was she just trading one cage for another? The crowd surged forward, a single, monstrous beast of anger. They were yelling for her to be put back in chains. They were yelling for her to be driven out into the wilderness, to die where she belonged. The sheriff's hand was now resting on the butt of his revolver. He wasn't aiming it, but it was a clear message. He was the law here. The sight of it made her stomach clench. She knew how quickly fear turned to bullets in this land. Then the cowboy did something that shocked her more than his choice had. He took one step, positioning his body squarely between her and the mob. His stance was solid, unmovable. His hand hovered near his own gun, not as a threat, but as a silent promise. He would not let them have her. A nervous hush fell over the crowd. It was an uneasy, simmering silence, the kind that comes right before the violence. The only sound was the faint metallic rattle of the discarded chains lying in the dust. The whispers started again, but now they were darker. Venomous. Talk of revenge. Of past raids and burned-out homesteads. Of the blood price that would be paid for this insult. Still, the cowboy stood his ground. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Her pulse was a thunder in her ears. But standing there, in the shelter of his shadow, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt protected. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He was frustrated, but he was also a man who recognized when a line had been drawn. He saw it in the cowboy's unyielding posture. The boy wasn't backing down. The choice was made, and the fragile peace of Fort Worth was about to shatter. In the girl's heart, one single thought burned away the fear. She didn't know his reasons. She didn't know his name. But this stranger had just chained his fate to hers. And now, the West would demand a price from them both. Her chest rose and fell, her breath still ragged as the town's fury pulsed around her. But her eyes never left the cowboy. He was a wall of defiance, shielding her from their hate. In her gaze, a lifetime of pain swirled. Anger for the years that had been stolen. Sorrow for the family she had lost. But deep beneath that storm, for the first time since her capture, a tiny, fragile spark of hope began to glow. He leaned in, his voice so low that only she could hear it over the grumbling of the crowd. His words hit her like lightning. "No one owns you now." For a split second, the world fell away. The angry faces blurred. The threats faded into a dull roar. All that existed was the echo of those 4 words. Words she had never, ever expected to hear again. She took a deep breath. A real one. It felt like the first time her lungs had truly filled with air in months. The crushing weight on her shoulders seemed to ease, just a little. But freedom in this country was never a gift. It was a debt, and the bill was already coming due. The glares from the townsfolk were daggers. Their whispers were promises of retribution. This hatred wouldn't just disappear because a chain had been broken. The cowboy's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a stark contrast to the hard set of his jaw. In that fleeting glance, she saw something incredible. He didn't just see a Comanche captive. He saw her. He saw the fire inside her, and he wasn't afraid of it. He seemed to respect it. Her lips parted, a word trying to form, but her throat was locked tight. Trust was a foreign currency in a land that had only ever paid her in betrayal. The crowd was growing restless again. The muttering was getting louder. Someone threw a small rock that landed near the cowboy's boot. He didn't even flinch. The sheriff was shouting for order, but his voice was strained, thin. She realized with a jolt of cold dread that their defiance had planted a dangerous seed. A seed that could easily grow into a tree of bloodshed, right here in the middle of this dusty street. But as she looked at the cowboy's profile, silhouetted against the angry mob, something stirred in her chest. It was a feeling so unfamiliar, so dangerous that it terrified her. It felt like belief. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, and tasted the air. The dusty, hot air of freedom. She let herself imagine a life where she could choose her own path. A life where her spirit wasn't in a cage. But when she opened her eyes, the reality of the West pressed in on her. Every breath of freedom would be shadowed by danger. Every step she took would be on hostile ground. She stood up a little straighter, moving to his side. It wasn't an act of submission. It was a statement. Her heart whispered a silent vow. If this freedom was truly hers, she would fight for it. She would die for it, even if the entire world rose up against them. They started walking, moving as one through the thick dust. Her bare feet connected with the earth, an earth that for the first time in a long time felt like it could be hers again. But every step was heavy. She could feel the burn of 100 hateful eyes on her back. And she felt something else too. A chill. The kind of chill that meant you were being watched. Not by a crowd, but by a hunter. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow detach itself from an alleyway, falling in behind them at a distance. A man wrapped in vengeance. He was part of a gang whose families had been killed in Comanche raids. He was looking to balance the scales with blood. The girl felt it. A cold dread snaking up her spine. The cowboy's stride didn't change, but she saw his hand brush the worn leather of his holster. His instincts were screaming too. In that tense, silent walk out of town, the truth became crystal clear. Her freedom wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A lit fuse burning its way toward a powder keg. Their survival would depend on trust, courage, and something more. But if hatred caught up to them first, then the choice made in that dusty yard would be nothing more than the first chapter of a brand new war. They walked in silence, leaving the noise and the hate of Fort Worth behind them. The sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and red. The silence between them was as vast and empty as the plains stretching out before them. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was heavy with unspoken questions. Who was he? Why had he done it? What did he want from her? She watched him from the corner of her eye. He was just a man. Taller than most, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had seen a lifetime of hard work. But there was something else about him. A stillness. A watchfulness. He wasn't just a simple cowboy. She knew they were being followed. The feeling of being watched was a cold knot in her stomach. She could almost hear the crunch of boots on the gravel far behind them. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Her voice was raspy from disuse, but it was steady. They are following us. It wasn't a question. The cowboy didn't look at her. His eyes kept scanning the horizon, reading the landscape like a book. I know. There are 3 of them, she added, her senses, sharpened by years of survival, picking up details he might have missed. He gave a slight nod. 2 on foot, 1 on a tired-looking horse. His calmness was unnerving. He was either a fool or he was far more dangerous than he looked. She was beginning to suspect it was the latter. They came to a small creek, the water trickling over smooth stones. He stopped and knelt, cupping his hands to drink. He gestured for her to do the same. The water was cool and clean, and it washed away some of the dust and fear clinging to her. As she drank, he spoke, his voice still low and even. "My name is Silas." She looked up, water dripping from her chin. She offered nothing in return. Her name was hers, one of the few things they hadn't been able to take from her. Giving it would be an act of trust, and she wasn't there yet. Silas didn't seem to mind. He stood up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "We need to get off this road. They'll wait for nightfall to make their move." He started walking again, turning off the main path and heading toward a series of rocky outcrops and canyons that jagged the landscape. It was harder terrain, but it offered cover. As they scrambled over the rocks, a stone dislodged under her foot. She stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully. A sharp cry escaped her lips before she could stifle it. Instantly, Silas was at her side, his hand grabbing her arm to steady her. His touch was firm, but not rough. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes filled with genuine concern. She pulled her arm away, her pride stung. "I am fine." She tried to put weight on the ankle and winced. It was already starting to swell. He looked at her ankle, then back at her face. His expression was unreadable. "You can't walk on that. We won't make it to shelter before they catch us." Panic began to bubble in her chest. To be caught out here, injured and defenseless. It was a death sentence. Without another word, Silas turned his back to her and knelt down. "Get on." She stared at his back, stunned. "No. This isn't a request," he said, his voice losing its gentle edge, replaced by a steel command. "We don't have time to argue. They're getting closer. I can hear them." She hesitated for a moment longer, her mind at war with itself. Relying on him felt like a surrender, but the alternative. Gritting her teeth, she wrapped her arms around his neck and allowed him to lift her onto his back. He stood up as if she weighed nothing. His strength was surprising. He began to move through the rocks again, his steps sure and steady, even with her weight. She could feel the warmth of his back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was a strange, disorienting intimacy. After a few minutes of silence, she felt she had to say something. "Why?" she whispered, her lips close to his ear. "Why did you choose me?" Silas didn't answer right away. He kept moving, his focus on the treacherous path ahead. The sun had almost completely disappeared, and long, dark shadows were stretching out from the rocks like grasping fingers. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Because my wife was Comanche." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She froze, her entire body going rigid on his back. His wife was Comanche, past tense. The implication hung in the air between them, as dark and as cold as the coming night. This wasn't about mercy. This wasn't about defiance. This was about a ghost. The revelation settled over her like a shroud. She wasn't a person to him. She was a replacement, a shadow he was trying to bring back to life. The thought was a bitter poison in her throat. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through her pain and exhaustion. She started to struggle, pushing against his shoulders. "Put me down!" she demanded, her voice low and fierce. "Be still," Silas grunted, his arms tightening to hold her in place. "They're close." "I will not be a ghost for you," she hissed, renewing her efforts to get free. He stopped abruptly, turning into a narrow crevice between two large boulders. He gently slid her down to the ground, pinning her between his body and the cold rock face. His hands were on her shoulders, his face inches from hers. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "Her name was Nokona. She was captured by raiders 5 years ago. They sold her. in a town just like that one. I was too late to save her." His eyes were filled with a pain so raw, so deep, that it stole the breath from her lungs. This wasn't the look of a man looking for a replacement. This was the look of a man trying to right an unforgivable wrong. "I've spent 5 years searching," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Not for her, but for them. The men who took her. The men who run these auctions." A twig snapped just outside their hiding spot. Silas instantly fell silent, his body tensing. He pressed her deeper into the shadows, his hand moving to cover her mouth. The voices of their pursuers drifted into the crevice. "Saw them come this way," one man said, his voice rough. "She's Comanche. She'll know these canyons like the back of her hand," said another. "We should have never let that cowboy walk her out of town." There was a third voice, colder and more calculating than the others. "It doesn't matter. He can't hide her forever. The boss wants her back. He was very specific about that." The girl's blood ran cold. The boss? She had assumed these were just vengeful townsfolk. But this was something else. This was organized. The men moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Silas waited a full minute before he slowly removed his hand from her mouth. "The boss?" she whispered, her earlier anger forgotten, replaced by a new, more terrifying fear. "Who is the boss?" Silas's jaw was set like granite. "His name is Jameson. He's a wealthy landowner who's been trying to start a war with the Comanche for years. He wants their land. He orchestrates raids, captures women and children, and then sells them in towns like Fort Worth to stir up hatred and fear." It all clicked into place. The auction, the sheriff's unease, the way the townsfolk were so easily whipped into a frenzy. It was all a performance, a carefully staged play designed to end in bloodshed. And she was the star of the show. "He wants a war," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "He wants an excuse," Silas corrected her. "He captures your people, sells them to settlers. Sooner or later, a warrior gets chosen by a fool, or a woman gets mistreated, and the Comanche retaliate. Then Jameson gets to ride in with the cavalry, looking like a hero, and claim all the land that's left behind after the smoke clears." He looked at her, his eyes dark with the weight of his confession. "I wasn't just choosing a bride back there," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was taking his prize piece off the board." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He hadn't chosen her because she looked like his dead wife. He had chosen her because he knew exactly who she was. Or rather, what she was. She was the one person whose capture would guarantee a war. "My father," she breathed, the realization dawning on her. "You know who my father is." Silas nodded slowly. "Your father is Chief Iron Eagle, the one man standing between Jameson and all-out war, with you as a hostage. Jameson could have forced your father's hand. He had saved her, not for himself, but to stop a war. He had walked into the lion's den and stolen the bait right from under its nose. But now, the lion was hunting them, and it wouldn't stop until it had its prize back." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She wasn't just a captive. She was a political pawn. Her life was the key to a war that would drown the plains in blood. And Silas? He wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man on a 5-year quest for vengeance, a quest that had somehow intertwined with the fate of her entire people. "We can't stay here," she said, her mind racing. Her sprained ankle, the darkness, the hunters. They were trapped. "No," Silas agreed. "They'll circle back." He looked down at her ankle, then back up at the treacherous moonlit rocks. "There's a cave system not far from here. My horse is hidden there. If we can make it, we'll be safe for the night." "They have a horse," she reminded him. "We are on foot." "They're city men playing at being trackers," Silas said with a confidence that she found strangely reassuring. They're loud and clumsy. We're not. Let's go. He helped her up, and this time when he offered his back, she didn't hesitate. Every movement sent a jolt of pain through her ankle, but she bit down on her lip, refusing to make a sound. Her survival, and maybe the survival of her tribe, depended on her silence. They moved like ghosts through the night. Silas seemed to have the eyes of an owl, finding paths that were invisible in the dim light. She, in turn, used her ears, listening to the night sounds, picking out the unnatural crunch of a boot on gravel, the startled cry of a bird that meant someone was passing below. They were a team. They were halfway to the caves when they heard the shout. There! Up on the ridge! They had been spotted. A gunshot echoed through the canyon, the bullet whining off a rock just inches from Silas's head. He didn't stop, just pushed himself harder, scrambling up a steep incline. Hold on tight! He yelled. Another shot, this one closer. She could feel the heat of it as it passed by her ear. The men were below them, moving faster now that they had a target. They reached the entrance to the cave, a dark slash in the rock face. Silas slid her carefully to the ground inside the entrance, pulling his own revolver. Stay back, he commanded, his body blocking the opening. She ignored him. She crawled deeper into the cave, her hands searching the ground. Her fingers closed around a heavy, sharp-edged rock. It wasn't a knife, but it would have to do. She crawled back toward the entrance, staying low in the shadows. She would not be a helpless victim. Not again. Outside, the men were getting closer. Their voices were confident, arrogant. Nowhere left to run, cowboy, the cold voice of the leader called out. Just send the girl out. The boss wants her unharmed. You, on the other hand, he wasn't so specific about. Silas didn't answer. He was conserving his bullets, waiting. A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the moonlight. He raised his rifle. Silas fired. The man screamed and fell backward. The other two immediately opened fire, bullets slamming into the rock around the cave entrance, sending chips of stone flying. Silas was pinned down. We'll wait you out, the leader yelled. Or maybe we'll just smoke you out. She heard them gathering brush. They were going to start a fire at the mouth of the cave, trapping them, suffocating them. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. This was how it ended. Then she remembered something. The cave system. Silas had said it was a system. That meant there had to be another way out. She began to crawl deeper into the darkness, away from the gunfire, her hands feeling along the walls. The air grew colder, damper. She could hear the drip of water somewhere in the blackness. Her hand brushed against something. A draft. A faint current of air moving through the solid rock. There was another opening. She turned back. Silas! She whisper-shouted. This way! There's another way out! He fired one more shot to keep their heads down, then scrambled back into the darkness toward her voice. Where? He asked, his voice tight with tension. I feel a breeze, she said, leading him deeper into the pitch-black cave. They moved quickly, stumbling in the dark, guided only by the faint current of air on their skin. The sound of the men outside grew fainter. They emerged from a narrow fissure on the other side of the ridge, a good 100 yards from the main cave entrance. Below, they could see the flicker of a fire starting as the two remaining men tried to smoke them out. They were fools. Silas pointed. My horse is just beyond that stand of trees. They limped toward it, a powerful-looking black stallion that nickered softly at Silas's approach. He swung into the saddle, then reached down and pulled her up behind him. Hold on, he said. And then they were flying, the horse's hooves thundering against the hard-packed earth, carrying them away from their hunters and deeper into the dangerous, unforgiving night of the Texas plains. They had escaped. But as she clung to Silas, the wind whipping her hair, she knew this was far from over. They had won the first battle. But Jameson would send more men. Better men. And next time, there might not be a cave to hide in. They rode through the night, the powerful stallion eating up the miles. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. Her ankle throbbed with every stride of the horse. She leaned against Silas's back, a silent admission of her own weariness. He seemed to be made of iron, his posture never slumping, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness. Just before dawn, they found a secluded spot, a small box canyon with a spring and enough grass for the horse. It was defensible, hidden, safe, for now. Silas helped her dismount, his hands gentle as he lowered her to the ground. She collapsed onto the soft grass, the pain in her ankle now a searing fire. Without a word, he examined it. His touch was surprisingly skillful. "It's a bad sprain, but not broken," he diagnosed. He tore a strip from his own shirt and soaked it in the cold spring water, then wrapped it tightly around her ankle. The relief was immediate. He built a small smokeless fire, using dry wood tucked under a rock ledge. He produced some dried meat and a canteen from his saddlebags. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the horse cropping grass nearby. The silence was different now. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken understanding. They were allies. Their survival depended on each other. Finally, she spoke the question that had been burning in her mind. "Nocona," she said, her voice soft. "Your wife. What happened to her?" Silas stared into the fire, his face etched with a pain that time had not healed. "She was taken in a raid. Not by warriors, but by white men disguised as Comanche. Jameson's men. They wanted to provoke my neighbors into demanding the army come. It worked." He picked up a stick, tracing patterns in the dirt. "By the time I figured out what really happened, she was gone. I tracked them to a town called Redemption. They were holding an auction, just like the one in Fort Worth. I was a day late. A rancher had bought her." His voice choked on the last word. "I confronted him," Silas continued, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. "He laughed, told me he owned her, that she was his property. I—" He stopped, his knuckles white as he gripped the stick. "I killed him, but it was too late for her. The things he'd done. She couldn't live with it. She took her own life before I could get her home." A heavy silence fell over the canyon. The girl's heart ached for him, for the woman she had never known. Her own story was filled with loss, but his was a fresh, gaping wound. "The men who took her," he said, his eyes lifting from the fire to meet hers. "The ones who sold her. I hunted every single one of them down. It took me 5 years. The last one I found told me about Jameson. He told me about the whole plan, how Jameson was the one pulling the strings all along." He looked at her, and now she understood the fire in his eyes. It wasn't just conviction. It was vengeance. "I couldn't save Nocona," he said, "but I can stop Jameson. I can burn his whole rotten empire to the ground. And freeing you, that was the first match." She finally understood. He hadn't just saved her life. He had given his own life a new purpose. His war was her war. She reached out and took the stick from his hand. In the dirt, she drew a symbol, the symbol of the Iron Eagle clan, her clan. Then she looked at him, her eyes clear and strong. "My name is Anawa," she said. It was a gift, an offering, an act of trust. Silas looked at the symbol, then at her. A flicker of something that wasn't pain crossed his face. It was hope. "Anawa," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It is good to know you." In that small, hidden canyon, two people from different worlds, brought together by violence and loss, made a silent pact. Jameson had started a war, but they were going to finish it. But as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the plains, a new threat was already on its way. Jameson was not a man who took losses lightly. He had lost his prize piece, and he would not send clumsy trackers next. He would send his best hunter, a man known only as the Scorpion, a man who never failed to bring back his prey, dead or alive. They rested for 2 days in the hidden canyon. It was a necessary pause. Anawa's ankle began to heal, the swelling going down thanks to the cold spring water and Silas's careful bandaging. He taught her how to handle a revolver, his hands patiently guiding hers until she could load, aim, and fire with a steady hand. She, in turn, showed him how to read the subtler signs of the land, the way a bent blade of grass could tell you who had passed and when, how the flight of a hawk could reveal a hidden water source. They were learning from each other, their skills blending into a formidable partnership. The brief peace was a fragile bubble, and they both knew it. On the morning of the 3rd day, Silas was scouting the canyon rim when he suddenly dropped flat, signaling for her to stay hidden. Anawa's heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed the revolver and crawled to the edge of the rocks, peering through a small gap. A lone rider was sitting on his horse on a distant ridge, scanning the landscape. He was too far away to make out his features, but his posture was unnervingly still. He wasn't a clumsy tracker. He was a predator. "That's him," Silas whispered, crawling back to her side. "Jameson's man. They call him the Scorpion." Anawa had heard tales of this man whispered around campfires. A bounty hunter of fearsome reputation. A man who could track a ghost through a sandstorm. "He knows we're here," she said. It wasn't a question. The way the man sat on his horse, so patient, so certain, told her everything. He wasn't searching. He was waiting. "He's trying to figure out our next move," Silas said, his mind already working through the possibilities. "He knows this canyon is a dead end. We have to go out the way we came in. He'll be waiting for us." It was a perfect trap. "So we don't go out the way we came in," Anawa said, her eyes tracing a line up the sheer canyon wall. Silas followed her gaze. The rock face was almost vertical, a treacherous climb of 100 feet or more. "It's too steep. The horse could never make that climb." "The horse can't," she agreed. "But we can." A desperate plan began to form in her mind. "We leave the horse. He will follow its tracks, thinking we are with it. It will lead him south. We will go north, on foot." It was a huge risk. On foot they would be slow, exposed. Their only advantage was the element of surprise. Silas looked at the cliff, then back at her. He saw the determination in her eyes. He nodded slowly. "It's our only chance." They waited for dusk. As the shadows deepened, Silas slapped his horse on the rump, sending it trotting out of the canyon mouth, heading south. They watched as, minutes later, the Scorpion's distant figure moved to follow it. The bait had been taken. Now came the hard part. The climb was brutal. They used every crack, every ledge as a handhold. Anawa, lighter and more agile, led the way, finding the path. Silas, with his raw strength, followed, helping her over the most difficult parts. Her ankle screamed in protest, but she pushed the pain down, focusing only on the next handhold, the next foothold. Hours later, bruised, bleeding, and utterly exhausted, they pulled themselves over the top of the canyon rim. They lay on the flat rock, gasping for air under a blanket of brilliant stars. They were free, but they were on foot, with no food, little water, and a killer hunting them. They walked north for 2 days, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. The land was harsh, unforgiving. The sun beat down on them, and their water ran out on the 2nd day. Anawa's ankle was a constant throbbing agony. On the 3rd day, as they stumbled through a barren, rocky landscape, they saw it. A small homestead, nestled in a shallow valley. A thin plume of smoke rose from its chimney. It could be salvation, or it could be a trap. "Jameson will have men everywhere," Silas warned, his voice a dry croak. "He'll have posters with our faces on them, a bounty." We have no choice, Anawa said, her own throat raw. We will die out here without water. They approached the homestead with extreme caution, hiding behind rocks, watching. An old man was chopping wood outside a small cabin. A woman was hanging laundry on a line. It looked peaceful, deceptively so. I'll go, Silas said. You stay here. If there's trouble, run. Anawa shook her head. We do this together. They walked into the clearing, their hands near their guns. The old man stopped chopping wood, his eyes narrowing as he saw them. The woman froze, her hand clutching a piece of laundry. Just looking for some water, Silas said, his voice calm and friendly. We're lost. The old man grunted, leaning on his axe. Lost, you say? Funny. You two match the description on a bounty poster I saw in town yesterday. A cowboy and his Comanche bride. He spat on the ground. There's $1,000 reward for the pair of you. Dead or alive. The woman dropped her laundry and ran inside the cabin. A moment later, the barrel of a rifle poked out of the window. They had walked right into the spider's web. The old man smiled, a cruel, greedy smile. $1,000 is a lot of money. More than this worthless piece of land will ever give me. Silas and Anawa exchanged a look. There was no way out. They were surrounded, exhausted, and outgunned. And then, from behind them, a cold voice spoke. The bounty is mine. They turned slowly. Leaning against a rock, casually cleaning his fingernails with a long, wicked-looking knife, was the scorpion. He had never followed the horse. He had known all along. He had been waiting for them to trap themselves. The scorpion's smile was a thin, cruel slash across his weathered face. You led me on a good chase, he said, his voice a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. But you were never getting away. Jameson wants his property back. His eyes flicked to Anawa, cold and possessive. Then he looked at Silas. And he wants you dead. The old farmer and his wife in the cabin were just pawns. The scorpion had likely been there for hours, waiting for his prey to walk into his perfectly laid trap. Let her go, Silas said, his body tense as a coiled spring. Your business is with me. The scorpion laughed, a short, ugly sound. My business is with whoever Mr. Jameson pays me for, and today he's paying for two. In that split second, Silas knew there would be no negotiation. He moved. He dove to the side, rolling behind a water trough as the scorpion's first shot rang out, splintering the wood where he had just been standing. Anawa, reacting on pure instinct, dropped to the ground, pulling her own revolver and firing toward the cabin window to keep the rifleman occupied. The old farmer, startled by the sudden violence, swung his axe wildly at Silas. Silas kicked out, sweeping the man's legs from under him. The axe flew from his grasp. The scorpion was fast, incredibly fast. He advanced, firing methodically, pinning Silas behind the trough. Bullets chewed through the wood, sending water spraying everywhere. Anawa knew Silas couldn't stay there. The trough was falling apart. She had to create a diversion. She saw the laundry line. A desperate, insane idea sparked in her mind. She scrambled toward it, staying low. The rifle in the window fired again, the bullet kicking up dirt near her feet. She ignored it. She grabbed the pole holding up the line and pulled with all her might. The pole came free. The line, heavy with wet laundry, swung down, sweeping across the yard right in front of the scorpion. He was momentarily blinded, tangled in wet sheets. It was the only chance they would get. Now, Silas! She screamed. Silas burst from behind the ruined trough, firing twice. The scorpion, snarling with rage, fired back blindly through the sheets. One of his bullets caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out in pain but stayed on his feet. Anawa took aim and fired at the cabin window. The rifleman's gun went silent. The scorpion tore himself free of the sheets, his face a mask of fury. He raised his pistol to finish Silas, but he had forgotten about the farmer. The old man, enraged and greedy, had recovered his axe. Seeing his $1,000 bounty about to be killed, he charged not at Silas, but at the scorpion, screaming, "He's mine!" The scorpion turned, surprised. It was a fatal mistake. Silas, clutching his bleeding shoulder, fired his last bullet. It struck the scorpion square in the chest. The bounty hunter staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face, before collapsing into the dust. The farmer, realizing what he had done, dropped his axe and stared in horror. He had just attacked the man who was supposed to pay him. Silas walked over and kicked the scorpion's gun away from his lifeless hand. Then he turned his cold, hard gaze on the farmer and his wife, who was now peeking out of the cabin door. "The bounty," Silas said, his voice dripping with ice, "has been canceled." He picked up the scorpion's gun and rifle, then retrieved the farmer's axe. He walked over to the well and dropped all 3 weapons down into the darkness. They landed with a distant splash. He looked at Anawa. "Let's go." She rushed to his side, tearing a strip from her dress to staunch the bleeding from his shoulder. "You're hurt." "It's not bad," he gritted out, though his face was pale. "It'll heal." They turned their backs on the terrified homesteaders and started walking, leaving the dead bounty hunter lying in the dust. They had survived. They had beaten Jameson's best man. But now, they were no longer just running. Now, they were on the offensive. "He'll know we're coming for him now," Anawa said as she helped Silas walk. Silas looked toward the horizon, in the direction of Jameson's vast ranchland. A grim smile touched his lips. "Good," he said. "Let him." The hunt was over. The war was about to begin. The wound in Silas's shoulder was worse than he let on. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had taken a lot out of him. They found shelter in a small cave, and for the next few days, their roles were reversed. Anawa became the hunter and protector. She used snares she fashioned from vines to catch small game. She found edible roots and herbs, not just for food, but to make a poultice for his wound to keep infection at bay. She watched him as he slept, feverish and weak. In his delirium, he spoke a name over and over. "Nokona." Her heart felt a strange pang. It wasn't jealousy. It was a deep, sorrowful understanding. He was a man haunted by ghosts, and she was becoming one of them. When the fever broke, he woke to find her sitting beside him, sharpening the scorpion's knife on a smooth stone. "You should have left me," he said, his voice weak. "And go where?" she replied without looking up. "We made a pact. Your war is my war. We finish it together." A new strength had been forged in her. The frightened girl from the auction yard was gone, burned away by hardship and violence. In her place was a warrior. When Silas was strong enough to travel, they began the long journey toward Jameson's ranch, the heart of his corrupt empire. They moved by night, living off the land, becoming shadows themselves. They learned that Jameson's ranch was more like a fortress. It was heavily guarded by hired guns, men who were paid to look the other way. A direct assault would be suicide. "We can't fight an army," Silas said one night as they watched the distant lights of the ranch house. "No," Anawa agreed. "So we don't fight his army. We fight him." Her plan was audacious, bordering on insane. "Jameson is holding a large gathering in 2 days," she explained, having gathered intelligence from a lone traveler they'd encountered. "He's meeting with other powerful men he's trying to convince to back his war. The ranch will be full of guests. Security will be focused on them, not on 2 people slipping in from the plains." "They'll have guards everywhere," Silas argued. "The guards will be watching the roads, the gates," she countered. "They won't be watching the cliffs behind the ranch house." It was a mirror of their escape from the canyon, but this time they were breaking in, not out. The night of the party, they painted their faces with mud and shadow. They moved like wraiths through the darkness, scaling the sheer rock face behind the opulent ranch house. Below them, music and laughter drifted up from the well-lit patio where Jameson was entertaining his guests. They slipped over the balcony of a darkened room on the second floor. It was Jameson's office. The room was a monument to his ego. Maps of Comanche territory on the walls, a massive desk made of polished oak, and a glass case containing Native American artifacts. Stolen history. Stolen lives. Anawa's eyes fell on a particular object in the case. A ceremonial peace pipe, intricately carved with the symbol of the iron eagle. Her father's peace pipe. It had been taken in the same raid that had led to her capture. It was a declaration of war in itself. A cold, clear rage settled in her heart. Silas found what he was looking for in the desk drawer. A ledger. He opened it, his finger running down the columns. It was all there. Names, dates, payments, proof of the fake raids, the hired guns, the bribes to officials. It was the key to destroying Jameson's empire. He tucked the ledger inside his shirt. We have what we came for. Let's go. But Anawa wasn't moving. She was staring at the peace pipe, her hand clenched into a fist. Not yet. Suddenly, the office door opened. Jameson walked in, accompanied by a man Anawa recognized with a jolt of shock. The sheriff from Fort Worth. The plan is working perfectly, Jameson was saying, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. The cowboy and the girl have disappeared. Probably dead in the desert. In a week, Iron Eagle will get word of his daughter's death. He'll come for blood. And we'll be ready for him. The sheriff took the glass, his face uneasy. I don't know, Jameson. This is getting complicated. Don't lose your nerve now, Sheriff, Jameson sneered. You're paid well to look the other way. Anawa and Silas were hidden behind a thick velvet curtain, their hearts pounding. They were trapped. Jameson walked over to the glass case. He took out the peace pipe, handling it like a cheap trinket. This will look good over my fireplace after I burn his village to the ground. That was it. Anawa couldn't stay hidden any longer. She stepped out from behind the curtain. That does not belong to you, she said, her voice quiet but ringing with cold fury. Jameson spun around, his eyes wide with shock. The sheriff dropped his glass, whiskey splashing across the expensive rug. You, Jameson breathed, his face contorting into a mask of rage. You're supposed to be dead. Silas stepped out beside her, his revolver leveled at Jameson's chest. The plan, Silas said, his voice like gravel, has changed. For a moment, no one moved. The music from the party below seemed a world away. Then Jameson smiled, a chilling, evil smile. He reached up and pulled a thick cord hanging next to the fireplace. Across the ranch, an alarm bell began to toll. You may have gotten in, Jameson hissed, but you'll never get out alive. The house erupted in chaos. Shouts, running footsteps, the sound of men arming themselves. They were trapped in the heart of the enemy's fortress. And the entire army was coming for them. The alarm bell was a death knell. Heavy boots were already thundering up the stairs. The sheriff, pale and trembling, fumbled for his gun. Don't move, he stammered, his weapon shaking in his hand. Silas didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Jameson. You're a dead man, he said, his voice low and final. Anawa moved like lightning. She grabbed a heavy inkwell from the desk and hurled it at the lamp, plunging the room into semi-darkness, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the windows. In the confusion, Silas fired. Not at Jameson, but at the sheriff's hand. The man screamed, his gun clattering to the floor. Jameson used the moment to dive behind his massive desk. Kill them! He roared to the men bursting through the door. I'll double the pay of the man who brings me their heads. The room was filled with gunfire. Silas and Anawa took cover, returning fire, making every shot count. They were hopelessly outnumbered. The balcony! Silas yelled over the roar of the guns. They backed toward the window, firing into the chaos of the room. A bullet grazed Anawa's arm, a hot, searing pain, but she didn't falter. They climbed over the railing, a 2-story drop to the stone patio below. For a second, they hesitated. Then, from the darkness below, a war cry ripped through the night. A sound that chilled the blood of Jameson's men and sent a surge of hope through Anawa's heart. It was the cry of the Comanche. Dozens of warriors on horseback stormed the ranch from all sides, arrows flying, rifles cracking. Her father, Chief Iron Eagle, had come. He must have been tracking them, following the trail of violence they had left in their wake. Jameson's hired guns, caught completely by surprise, were thrown into chaos. The party guests screamed and scattered. Jameson appeared on the balcony, his face white with fury and disbelief as he watched his army being torn apart. His war had come, but it had come for him. He saw Anawa and Silas poised to jump. He raised his pistol. But before he could fire, an arrow, swift and silent, sprouted from his chest. He looked down at it, a stunned expression on his face, then toppled forward over the railing, crashing onto the patio below. Chief Iron Eagle sat on his warhorse in the middle of the chaos, a smoking rifle in his hand. His eyes met Anawa's across the battlefield. The fighting was fierce but short-lived. Jameson's mercenaries, their leader dead, lost their will to fight. Some surrendered, others fled into the night. When the silence fell, broken only by the crackling of fires that had started to catch on the house, Anawa and Silas stood in the courtyard amidst the wreckage. Chief Iron Eagle dismounted, his proud, weathered face a mask of stern relief. He walked toward his daughter. He looked from her to Silas, his eyes lingering on the man who stood by her side, whose ledger held the proof of Jameson's crimes, whose quest for vengeance had saved his daughter. Anawa took a breath, ready to explain everything, but her father simply looked at Silas and gave a single slow nod. A sign of respect, a sign of thanks. The war was over. Justice had been served. In the days that followed, the truth came out. Silas gave the ledger to the army officials who arrived to investigate the battle. The sheriff, eager to save his own skin, confessed everything. Jameson's name was ruined, his conspiracy exposed. The fragile peace, once threatened, was now stronger, built on the foundation of a truth that had been brought to light by blood and sacrifice. Anawa returned to her people, not as a captive, but as a hero. She had faced the white man's world and had not been broken by it. Silas stayed for a while, helping to rebuild. He was treated as an honored guest, a brother. He and Chief Iron Eagle would often sit by the fire, talking in low tones, two men from different worlds who understood each other perfectly. But Silas was a man with ghosts. His quest was over, but his heart was still a lonely place. One evening, as he was preparing his horse to leave, Anawa came to him. "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. "My work here is done," he said, not looking at her. "There's nothing left for me here." "You are wrong," she said softly. She stepped closer, taking his hand. "You came looking for vengeance. You came to honor a ghost, but you found me." He finally looked at her. In her eyes, he didn't see the shadow of his dead wife. He saw Anawa, strong, brave, and alive. "Nokona is at peace, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "Her spirit is free. It's time for yours to be free, too." He looked at the vast plains stretching out before them, a land of endless possibility. He could ride away, spend the rest of his life as a wanderer. Or he could stay. He could build something new, a life. He looked down at her hand in his. It felt right. Slowly, he smiled. A true, genuine smile that reached his eyes and chased away the shadows. He had come to Fort Worth to settle a debt from the past. He never expected to find a future. The West was a hard land, a land of endings and brutal goodbyes. But sometimes, just sometimes, it was also a land of new beginnings. And theirs was just getting started. If you were on the edge of your seat through this story, Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next.